Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Thomas Hall, Executive Director of CleanStart, and I'm really glad you can join us today for what I think will be one of our most practical and forward-looking CleanStart perspectives yet. At CleanStart, our mission is to help entrepreneurs and innovators in the clean tech space turn big ideas into thriving businesses. And part of that is staying ahead of the curve, especially when it comes to tools that can help you work smarter, faster, and more efficiently. That's why today's conversation about using AI responsibly and effectively is so timely. Before we get into it, I want to take a moment and thank our partners who make events like this possible. So we have SMUD, who has their 2030 goal of zero emissions by then, for their unwavering support of clean energy and innovation in our region. The Wet Center at Fresno State for helping water, energy, and ag tech companies grow in the Central Valley. Witten Law, who provides expert legal support for startups and founders. River City Bank, who is not only a strong financial partner in businesses, but focuses really hard on clean energy projects that will really make our community and everything stronger. In addition to Baker Tilly, formerly known as Moss Adams, whose advising and encountering services help startups scale. Now, we truly appreciate their support in helping us build a stronger clean tech ecosystem here in the Valley. And now let's get to why we're here. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Jessica Karas, Senior Gen AI Consultant with Baker Tilly. Jessica has led transformational AI projects across industries and specializes in helping organizations from early stage startups to established enterprise understand not just how to use AI, but to use it well. She's especially focused on building AI fluency, prototyping new ideas, and helping teams adopt these tools responsibly. She'll be walking us through how to unlock practical value from Gen AI tools, spotlight use cases that matter to startups, and help us all better understand where the opportunities and the risks really are. So, Jessica, thank you for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I am going to swap this over and take over the screen. All right, wonderful. I think that worked. Well, thank you all for joining today. Today, we're going to tap into how to actually approach business value with generative AI. And what we mean by that is that in working with a lot of clients, we find that a lot of organizations are thinking, right, we want to use generative AI. We know that it can do a lot for our business, but how do we actually approach it? And how do we actually approach it responsibly and in a way that we can actually see those cost savings as well? So throughout this session, I'm going to try and provide some insights into that. Please feel free to ask questions. I do want this to be interactive. I don't want you to be sick of my voice at the end of it. So ask questions on the go way. If I don't know how to answer them, I'll let you know and I'll get back to you at a later time. But I hope the session is fun and informative for you all. So I'm going to start with just a rough question to get to know you all a bit. Want to understand what your current perception of generative AI is today. And you can pop it in the, don't know if you can pop it in the chat there. See if I can see it too. Don't know. Don't know if I can see the chat. Seems to have gone in my Zoom.
Well, we've got some people that think it's
Yeah,
overhyped, that they're optimistic about it, cautious, curious, got a second, optimistic.
awesome.
No concerns yet.
Good. Okay, I do tend to agree with those feelings. I think that that's where I kind of resonate as well in that I'm optimistic. I do think there is a lot of media overhyping what is going on. I am also very cautious about using it, right? And everyone has their own little, I guess, quirks when they're using generative AI. I'm very careful about if I'm screenshotting a PowerPoint slide because I want to see if the flow is right, right? I'm going to like cut off the logo. I'm on that cautious side when I use it. But I also know that that's going to help me then understand if my PowerPoint has a nice flow. It's those types of little use cases where it's like, okay, I'm optimistic about how this is going to help me, but I'm also treading on that cautious line where I'm like, right, should I be putting my data out there? And we're going to tap into that a bit today. So before I get started, I do just want to go over just some of the nuances of what is generative AI. And if you are a generative AI expert, please feel free to zone out for about 5 minutes while we go into this. Alternatively, you can take this as a new approach for educating your own teams, family members, friends, as what is and is not generative AI. But at the crux of it all, the way we define artificial intelligence is that it is a computer system designed to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. So if we think tasks like reading, seeing, when you unlock your phone with your face, right? Predictive analytics, that's the huge one here. Machine learning. Oh, I think my internet froze. Machine learning. Anything that you think is a human intelligence task, we're able to replicate using specific AI technology. So kind of like a superhuman kind of way. Where generative AI comes in is it's this evolution of AI models in a way that's able to be combined in a sense to create new items. So we're using natural language processing to create new text. We're predicting the next word in a series. We're able to recognize images by pixelating them in a similar fashion to how computer vision worked in the past. And it's this evolution of being able to create new content that has really expedited this wave of AI technology. And it's this evolution that has really caused this overhype. I mean, for example, Netflix took over 3 years to hit 1 million users. Instagram took 2 months. ChatGPT took 5 days. And it's this wave of, wow, like what can we now do with this technology? We not only can we create new text, but we can create music, we can create voice, we can create images, right? What can we actually do with this now in a way that is productive? So I really want to hone in on what GenAI is and is not. Okay, like it is not a search engine. Some platforms we'll talk about have the ability to hook into the internet through different APIs, but it is not regurgitating facts. I really want to hone that in. It's also not replacing our own creativity and human judgment. It is so important as users of generative AI to validate everything that we use and to use our own brains along the way. A recent study actually came out with MIT about how using ChatGPT was actually negatively impacting brain growth. And it made the news everywhere. I'm sure people have read it. I took a read over it briefly, so don't take me as gospel saying this, but essentially it was finding that those who just use generative AI because they just wanted to get a job done and they didn't validate the information, that was who it was negatively impacting. However, those who had the higher critical thinking skills, who are using it to learn, who are using it to then validate their own understanding and to then see if it was correct and direct their own research, it wasn't negatively impacting them. So it was the way in which we are using these tools versus, so saying, taking it as face value versus using it as a collaborative participant in the way that you work. That's where that differentiator is. And I think that's really important to understand. So we keep hearing here and there about how large language models, the crux of generative AI, can be likened to a powerful predictive model. And while you don't need to know the ins and outs of how it works, I do think it is good to build some foundations around why this is or how it is trained. And so I'm going to just take a quick moment here to go under the hood of what's happening in an AI model. So whether it's creating an image of a car or helping you write a grant application or respond to a new client email, the process follows a surprisingly intuitive pattern. So in this training mode, we start by feeding the model this huge amount of reference data. So I'm talking like images, documents, sound recordings, code, you name it. I mean, this is where a lot of those lawsuits are coming into fruition because it was trained on everything that was essentially public information on the web. So I'm talking huge amounts of data. And then depending on what you want the AI to be good at, this training data is then tagged and categorized, and it goes through this process of reinforcement learning. So for example, if you want to train a model on how to understand what a car is, you're going to give it millions of photos of cars, and you're going to be tagging these different parts of the car. So you're going to be saying, this is a wheel, this is a windshield wiper, this is the trunk or the boot in Australia of the car, right? You're going to start piecing it together. And so then when it starts generating new items with these pixelations and what it's learned, that's how it then starts to group it together. But then that's also why it isn't a fact database. And sometimes when you generate images, they can look a little quirky. For example, I used AI to generate these images here, and it's got 2 group A's and 1 group B, and the color patterns are off. It's not perfect, but I also didn't prompt it perfectly either. So you have this combination of, right, it's good to an extent, but that extent is also dependent on you providing your context to it too. So, like I said, it is this enormous predictive model with text too. One good example I like to think of is if you say the cat sat on the, and you blank out the end of the sentence, your context or your knowledge or your personal experience with cats is going to finish that sentence. So it could be the cat sat on the hat, right? The cat sat on the mat. If your cat likes to sit on the fridge, maybe that's how you finish that sentence. But it's going to predict that next most likely word based on all of this data that it has been trained on and the context you give it as well. So when I talk about context, right, this is going to be that differentiator between training and what we call the context window. A lot of users of generative AI platforms think that say if you use OpenAI, they think ChatGPT is learning their behavior. It is learning and it is training and it's getting better and better at understanding who you are as a user. That is only right to an extent, and that's where this line comes in. So that training is that first image in that previous slide that I'm referring to. That's when we're feeding it all this data and we're fine tuning and we're training these models. From an energy perspective, right, this is going to be where a lot of that energy consumption is coming into play, because that's where it's all going to training, not necessarily always the usage to that extent. So once you train the model, it gets to this point where you're using it, be it GPT 4.1, Gemini, Claude, you name it, and you go in and you're going to provide it your context. So first, that's going to be your system prompt. A lot of these platforms enable you to tailor a system prompt behind the scenes. So whether you want to make sure it always responds in a style of writing, or you want to make sure that it knows that it is a policy assistant, right? Whatever your primary goal is, that's what you can set as your system prompt. And then your user prompt is that on the fly, how you're interacting with it as you go. So that's going to be when you say, write this report for me, that's going to be your user prompt going in. What's also going in here, and why people think that it's learning them, is what's called user memory. So when you sign up for these applications, you are agreeing permissions for them to be storing your user memory. So that is your chat data, how you're interacting with it, any of your inputs, how you're responding, whether you like the outputs or not. And all of this feeds into this context window that then generates your output, or what you're seeing the generative AI give back to you. So that's why you think, or it feels like it's learning you, when essentially this context window is just so large that it's able to provide all of this information to give back. Where the data leaks or the data risks lie is that when you're signing up for them to store your user memory, a lot of the time contractually, you're also giving them the privilege to store your data and then use it to train the model, right? So then you're saying, right, in all of these chats that I'm having with ChatGPT right now, not only can you use my user memory to improve the results that I'm getting back, but you can also store it and you can use that data to train the next edition of the model. So that's why these models are just getting better and better as they go because of how they're being trained. And where we see that this being a data risk is where you think, right, if they're storing my data or they're training this model on my data and GPT 6.3 suddenly tells them all my secrets, is this going to be annoying? Is this going to be devastating? Or is this going to be something that I can laugh off? And that's then going to tailor your approach to how you start to use these models, whether you're building something in-house behind a firewall, whether you're fine using open licenses, but only for specific things or personal usage, or whether you're building from scratch, and which is an entire different beast. But this understanding of context versus training should really ground your approach to what data you're feeding into a generative AI model. So I would love to understand how often people are using generative AI currently. And Thomas, if you could read out what people are putting in the chats, that would be awesome, just to gauge an understanding of usage, if we have some super users in the crowd here.
I got some once or twice, once a week, never. Uh,
Never.
once or twice a day for things like emails, all the time from Scott Campit, Paul Sathis, all the time, every day, once or twice a day. So I'd say,
Awesome.
it's a kind of good arc. Um,
Yeah. Are any of those who are super users who have it open all day, either of you comfortable to come off mic and kind of say what you use it for
Paul, Scott,
or in the chat?
we're in the chat too.
Because I'm definitely someone who has it open all day and I have different models open all day for different use cases. So I'd love to hear how you're using it.
Anna uses it open every day. How do you use it every day, Anna?
Hey,
Um,
Jessica.
use it for work and for personal tasks. Or
Is it crafting emails? Is it
so, not so much for emails, mostly for ideation. So I think it's a great tool for kind of, yeah, getting the ideation process started so that you're not just sitting there in front of like a blank page. So sometimes for writing, for, you know, doing some research, stuff like that.
I I'm going to throw in some things that I heard kind of recently. So Greg Conley, founder of Trifecta, and now has had some very successful food manufacturing startups, has just shifted over to into the clean energy space with Cora Power, and he relied heavily on Chat GPT, similar in the way that Anna kind of described for ideation and figuring out kind of, for him at least, what the heck was going on in the energy space and what all the experts were saying so that he could understand it and digest it into something manageable. I see Peter has his hand raised. Peter? Zula.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. The question on that last slide. Oftentimes, when we're using new pieces of software, we're presented with the option to opt out of that last feedback loop you described,
Yeah.
Jessica, of stored user conversations going into the data and feeding it. Is this to say that currently AI models that are out there, like the ones you mentioned, disallow users to opt out of that feedback loop of our personal information feeding the model?
No. So if you opt out, that is, and this is the interesting part, right? Is that if you are opting out contractually, they are not allowed to, right? So you are signing, you're going through that agreement with that provider to say, I don't want you training my data. And it's this level of trust there, right? There's no necessarily laws or regulations around that. We are trusting them as businesses to abide by that contract. So that's where it's just going down to that. How are you using it? And being conscious that that is an option, because that's a very clever pickup there, is saying, right, where can I untick this box? Or where can I find out this information before I sign an enterprise agreement? So definitely, if you're opting out, That's something that a lot of businesses do. That's something I'm trusting when I use an API connector to OpenAI. I'm trusting that they're storing it for 30 days per their contract, and then they're deleting it. They are not training it.
Okay.
So no, I think that's a fair call.
Yeah, I didn't even know that there was an opt-out for the AI that I use. So I guess I'll have to dig into those settings. Thank you.
Yeah, have a look. Sometimes there may not be. I am familiar with the OpenAI one if you use the API call versus in the actual chat.
And a cool, neat little thing is if you have a lot of public writing out there already, you probably can ask ChatGPT to use your voice to create something and not and still keep the what you give it private. So I don't know if that's fun or terrifying, but
Awesome. So this context window, right? So going back to that slide, it just showed where you have the user memory, your context, and how that's feeding in. When you're signing up for these subscriptions, a lot of the times you'll see tokens. And this idea of tokens, which you probably come across again when you're signing up, is how the generative AI handles all the text and all the information that you're providing it. So the greater the context window, the more information you can put into a prompt, the more input documents you can give it, and so forth. And then also the more information you can get out of your output too. It doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, in my opinion, one's better or worse, especially when your tasks are specific or they don't require a huge context window, right? If you're like, I can give a really detailed prompt and just get this email out of it, I don't need my user memory involved. That doesn't require a huge context window there. So that's where you're seeing this concept of tokens. I believe a token equivalates to about 4 words if you want to do any of the math with the costing there. And normally the tokens are also 0.02 or 0.05 cents. And you'll find that the cost of that approach doesn't necessarily add up that quickly either. And that's something I'll go into in one of the case studies that we've had a look at when you're looking at whether you want to build, partner, buy. But that's this idea of context windows. Also, if you think over time, if you're using these models more and more, and this was something I did a bit of research on, because I was like, well, hang on, if I'm someone in Claude all day, every day, my context window is surely going to fill up. And then what happens then? So what it starts doing is it'll drop off the oldest piece of information. So whatever is the oldest conversation that it has had with you, it'll disregard that in order to focus on the new one. So again, this concept of that, it's not learning, it's not training, information is dropping out of your context window as you fill it up. So then how are we optimizing that and how are we using that? Something else that's important is the knowledge cutoff date. What's incredible is so many of these new release models have really up-to-date knowledge cutoffs. Some of them are still quite outdated, but just being conscious that, again, it's not a fact database. Not everything it spits out is going to be factual. Take a double look at it, but it is getting really advanced, which is awesome. A lot of these models are also good at specific things. And this is why I say I have about 3 different models open all day, every day, and I will go to different ones for different tasks that I'm doing. I'm quite biased towards Anthropic Claude. Anthropic is known for being a more responsible company. They really have high standards when it comes to ethics and generative AI. And I really like their user experience. I like the way I can see code when I'm using it for code and get it to explain what it's doing. That's my preference. If I want to do a bit of quick research, I'm going to Perplexity. So I always have Perplexity open every day. Perplexity is interesting in, and there's a few applications like this, but it's using a combination of large language models for different tasks. And if you sign up to their pro version, I do not, I use the free version, but you can actually select what model you want to use for different prompts. So that's another way to approach it, right? Instead of just saying, I'm always going to use Anthropic or OpenAI, what are these different platforms where you can use a combination? Perplexity is also really neat is that it's connected to web search too. So it'll give you that predictive text, but it also gives you the option to click the link that it provides. A lot of them who have this web search, I know Grok, I believe, has it too if you turn that on. I really endorse that feature because then you can go and start your own research to validate the outputs that it gives you. When you're also using these models, I mean, there's no one size fits all. My team all uses different ones collectively. We all have our preferences. But it is important, I think, to know how I guess, the reputation of the company, of the model, and how it's being used. And I say that with respects to probably Grok and its past news breach with its system prompt. Essentially, there was a bit of chaos that erupted when an engineer tailored the system prompt so that instead of any queries relating to South Africa were reference to genocide, it was all queries. And so anyone who even went into Grok to say, oh, write me an email, it would bring up South Africa. And it just went into this chaos. And then they got a fix. And now if you ask it about it, I think the latest update is that it says that engineer has been dealt with. But I think for me, when I read that, it really just honed in that, wow, these companies actually do have some power behind how they're prompting it, right? There are these layers of system prompts that go behind. And I think from an ethics and a bias perspective, it is important to think, do I trust this company? Is the output I'm getting biased in any way? Is it swaying me in any direction? And again, don't trust it as fact, right? Knowing that it is this really large language model where it's predicting the next word. So when we're thinking about it from a business perspective, I talk about AI fluency and I provide all that education because at the crux of it all, I truly believe, and Baker Tilly, Moss Adams truly believes that fluency is at the root of success when it comes to generative AI. And how we think about this is on this scale. So if you're using AI just to write emails here and there, just to augment a task or two every other day, you're really just using it on the lower end of that assist. It's providing insights, it's reducing some manual effort, but it's also probably fair to say that AI maturity is probably on the lower end, and the understanding of potential use cases is also on the lower end. As we build our fluency, we start to think, oh, here are the different ways and the different use cases that I can start to use this technology. And as we build that, we start to think, right, what other foundations do I need? What other resources or team members do I need to build this perhaps? Or what governance protocols do I need to have in place? So that's going to be your maturity and how you're embedding it into your workflow. And as it all incrementally increases, that's when you start to see it really augment the way you work. Agent is this idea that it is integrated into a lot of different workflows. It's integrated into different apps, it's automating everything, and there's a sense of agency. I personally believe that we're quite a long way from that. And I really like to focus on this augment shift, where we're augmenting our business processes. Generative AI is a participant in our business processes to speed things up and think about things differently. And I believe in order to get to that stage, it's so important to understand what is and isn't generative AI. How can I use it? Where is not the right use case to be using this, right? And really building that fluency up. So when it comes to rethinking business processes, I've got a couple of examples on the board here. But one common one that we see is this idea of finding information, right? And especially probably for the more institutional companies who have been around ages with so much documentation, and they're like, no one knows where to find this. So let's build a FAQ and let's have another SharePoint drive and just another folder for everyone to go to. That's probably the most common solution that I hear. And also one at this point that just makes me roll my eyes because we don't need another FAQ out there. There are way too many. But what if we absolutely rethought this and we thought, right, what if instead we uploaded all of our existing FAQs and any new information or any SharePoint files that we have into a knowledge base? And then what if in that knowledge base we can use large language models so that our employees can interact with it and it's being fine-tuned on the information that we have provided it. So it's getting this information. And perhaps to ensure accuracy, when it spits out the output, it has a link to the PDF file that it got that information from, right? We're rethinking how people are finding information. Same with lost institutional knowledge. As people move on, or if you want to remember a certain idea or a conversation, how about we just all screen record or audio record ourselves for 5 minutes once a week, spitballing what we know about our company, what's important, and then turning that into a database that we can interact with. So this idea of maintaining knowledge and information as well as automating these workflows, we're completely rethinking how we go about it. And I think that's really cool and exciting, but it does take a lot of brain power to do this and a lot of thought if we want to do this successfully as well. So I've got a couple of use cases that I'm going to go through just from different organizational work. This one, this in-house GPT, was actually a Moss Adams pre-Baker Tilly endeavor when generative AI first came out. So when it was starting to take wheels, the company was like, right, we need to start being proactive on this because we don't want to have what we call shadow AI users, which is where people are using AI, but they're not disclosing it. And then that's how a lot of data leaks can happen, or your confidential information ends up online. We want to be aware of how they're using it too, so that we can track this ROI and the efficiencies that they're getting. Because if you have this top-down leadership with this bottom-up enthusiasm, that's where you're going to find a lot of your use cases start to come to life, because the people on the ground are thinking, actually, I wouldn't mind automating this process. Can we use generative AI to do X, Y, Z? And then if you have the leadership endorsing it, that's when you're going to start to find the funding and the resources to make these ideas come to life for future cost savings. So in this situation, Moss was like, right, we could do an enterprise license with, I believe the decision was with OpenAI at the time. Enterprise licenses are going to cost around $100 a month. On the scale of having 4,000 employees, that's going to add up real quick. So instead, they were like, right, how can we leverage a partnership that we already have, being with Azure, their partnership with OpenAI to use their API Q calls from that, and build something using our internal resources, our internal developers who have the know-how, and bring that cost down. So now we have our own Moss GPT platform that's leveraging our Azure OpenAI agreement. Our data is staying behind our firewall. We've had the cost and resource commitment of building that tool, but now we have something that's only going to cost about $1,200 a month for 4,000 employees using it on a token scale. So it's per usage, per tokens. And we also have something that we can continuously improve and add use cases to. Do we want something to help the way that we develop statement of works? Do we want a research buddy to start thinking about how we approach solving problems? Do we want someone to help us curate our performance reviews and give us ideas on goals to set? These different applications now are within this Moss GPT, and we're able to bring these use cases to life because we have that hands-on control at a lower cost. The enterprise agreement definitely, I believe, would be awesome for smaller companies. If you have the cost there, you don't have the resources to build. I'll touch on this later, right? It's that build, partner, buy mentality of what's going to be best for your business. For Moss at the time, building made sense for us on a cost scale, and it also enables us to have this rapid deployment of new use cases along the way.
One thing I would want to highlight actually back from that
Yeah.
is, you talk about shadow AI usages. And even if you're an early stage company, I know we have Doug Bosley on here from Witten Law. So if someone were to put a trade secret into an open AI platform that learns from it, would that potentially end that trade secret? If Doug's here.
Yes, it would.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
If it's out there, it's out there. There's no putting the genie back in the bottle.
yeah. So you might think you're using a free open platform of ChatGPT, but from our local attorney helping businesses here, you're gonna lose. You could lose your trade secret if an employee goes and utilizes it. Just out of curiosity, like what are the size of teams that you see implement different AI solutions? Because if you are a small company, maybe there's a handful of you that are experts in one area. Do you have to now go hire people to do AI to be more efficient, or is this something that like, hey, can pretty easily be picked up?
yeah. So not necessarily a plugin. I'm not here to sell, but for example, if you're like, right, we don't have the resources to build, let's think of a partner approach. And that's when a lot of like AI consultancies can step in. With Moss, with this Moss GPT, we were able to build it and containerize it so that should a client wish to have their own secure environment in a Docker, we can kind of lift and shift that. And that's at a low cost. And a lot of companies have created environments like this where it's like, if you want your own, let's chat, let's lift and shift what we've got. And then you can also select what models you want. Maybe you don't want to use OpenAI. Maybe your team is using it for a lot of code and you want to use Claude instead, because that's a bit more specialized for that domain. So thinking about those use cases, but also being able to tailor it, I'd say that's when a partnership approach probably kicks in. If it is the information where you're like, I really just want to leverage Copilot, again, they have different agreements in place. You're going to buy into their, if you're already using Office, I know it has its quirks, it's still improving, but there is a lot of time savings with leveraging Copilot. I've heard from people who have like figured out those quirks and worked out how to prompt it
So
correctly.
how long should someone, expect it take to implement AI solutions? Because I know sometimes where it's like, okay, you're going to implement this new type of software, and if it's been 6 months and it's still not working, you probably should, of course, walk away or try to figure out something different. But at what kind of time frame would you expect a company to be able to implement an AI solution that's, let's say for all their emails and doing project management?
For something like that, I honestly couldn't tell you from like knowing, like if you're like turning on Copilot, how long it
Mhm.
takes. From conversations, it hasn't been a big haul. Like it's not something where it's like, oh, we're implementing, I don't know, Salesforce, and that's going to go over all of our systems, and that can take quite a while because it's such a big tech investment. With a lot of these AI platforms, I'm seeing them up and running kind of in the 3 to 6 month mark. A lot of the time, it is just a matter of turning the on switch, especially if you're just talking about a licensing agreement, right? You can just flick that on and everyone can kind of have a login within the week.
Mhm.
So it just really depends on how you're approaching it. If you're building it from scratch, well, that depends on your dev team, right? And what
Mhm.
resources you have and the investment. Even there, from working with my previous company in Australia, that was up, I'd say, within also the 3 to 6 month mark for 10,000 employees. So it's not this, if you want the basic run of the mill, let's just get a chat in, it's not going to be a huge chunk of resource commitment. It's when you start getting those more integrated AI platforms that isn't just let's flick the on switch, let's build our own, let's have an integration go in. That's where you're going to see more time sink. I would say based on like conversations I've had.
Mhm. What are some, I guess, warnings or that you might have when it comes to implementing this, where we've seen a lot of, I guess, companies where they want to put it every single place or want their AI to be in every single thing that you use, but it seems a little intrusive and like that it might not work out as well as people would hope. Is there any kind of warnings that you might have for people on implementing them?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go into this after a couple of the use
Okay.
cases, but it really comes down to what is your business problem, right? If you're not having any issues with sales and your call out team is doing great, they aren't feeling overburdened, why would you need a generative AI there to fix a problem that's not there, right? Where are your pain points? And that's what it really comes down to. This use case here, the document processing, their pain point was that they had so many documents that needed to be put in a chronology for an audit. And this was a pain point because the individuals performing this task, that wasn't their job, right? This was an add-on to something that needed to happen for compliance reasons. And so it was taking away from what they should be doing and what their career is asking of them, and it was causing a huge time and resource sink. So that was identifying their use case. The solution to that isn't saying, right, let's go and give you a generative AI platform and people can use it to chat. What we did instead was we investigated some different tools. In this case, DocuPipe, I can vouch for, has been excellent at extracting text from documents and using generative AI to write summaries through what they call schemas. So you're able to put your documents in, not only use the traditional character recognition to extract the text, but also then say, can you summarize these documents for me? Can you find the date that it was written? Can you find who signed it off, right? These little nuances that generative AI then enables us to do in this workflow. And with something like that, you're able to set up your API connectors, send the documents through, and a task that was taking an FTE 2 complete weeks to complete, also grudgingly going through these documents dating back to the 1950s to say who wrote it, why it was wrote, what information is in it, and put it into this chronology. We were able to create a workflow that was able to load all of that through in under 2 hours. So not only are you giving time back, you're also saving FTE money so that they can be doing what they want to be doing within your workforce. So hinting on like tasks like this where it's a pain point and you really just want to alleviate time and money, that's where you're going to start seeing those benefits, and you can actually track them too, right? If you talk about like AI everywhere and AI tools everywhere, how are you actually tracking the ROI on that? We've had clients reach out saying that exact problem, and now they need to hire a consultancy to come in and do a count of all the AI tools they're using and say which ones have overlapping features. So now they can cut cost on how much AI they're using. So you have the opposite problem going on. And this is right, it's not just an AI problem, this is a technology thing too. A lot of tech over the years, it's like, oh, we need this feature, we need Slack and Zoom and Teams and all these things. And it's like, well, no, you don't. But how can we optimize one thing that we have and how can we use that? So another use case I want to bring to light is policy analysis. So if you think heavy documents that you need to evaluate or keep track of or keep a log of so that you know what's in each document and how you can keep tabs of that over time so that you know what data you should keep, what data you should get rid of. This was a problem with a HR audit that was undergo. And they essentially just needed a detailed analysis of what was in all their policies and procedures. Did it align to federal regulations and certain state regulations when it pertained to HR? And what was missing from this? And this was a task that was taking FTE around 200 hours to complete. By the time that they read through them all, they mapped them to the certain regulations, they provided a list of the non-compliant elements, maybe did another review, then went and hand wrote all the policies and procedures. With a structured workflow, we were able to kind of churn this through, including review time, in about 10 hours. So this is saying, right, let's read all these policies and procedures. Here's a list of the recommendations. Now, you as a human, can you please review these? Human reviews, does a quick check over any federal regulations that seem a bit weird, puts their own knowledge in, makes their additions, then takes those recommendations to generate the new policies and procedures, reviews those, adds their own human touch to it. And all of that was able to be significantly time reduced, right? You're still having that human in the loop. You're still checking your work and you need that critical thinking component. Otherwise, maybe it's making up something. There were a few regulations that just didn't exist that we needed to go through and check, but you're still saving time because instead of that manual one by one check through all these documents, you're able to then say, oh, okay, well, this is in that document and this is in that, and let's open that one. And you're able to just have a new partner in your workflow to speed up the task that needs to be done. So I've thrown this in. Feel free to just also like not use what's in the poll and have your own thoughts in the chat. But I mean, from a startup perspective and new businesses, where is it? Are you seeing AI, or would you like to see AI augment your business value more? Like, are you in the innovation space trying to tap into new markets? Is it customer experience, right? That sales component there. Got the chat. I can realize I can open now.
Seeing AACA.
Yep. So operational efficiency, that customer experience. Awesome. Yeah. And I think this is a huge, I think to me personally, this is the main one. And if we're talking about quick wins, right, operational efficiency is where you're going to see there. We've also got an E, all of the above. I love it. No, so I think so the reason why I asked this question, right, is because when we're going to use generative AI, we need to be thinking, why are we using it? And I have this thing where I say, just because GenAI can doesn't mean it should. And I really think this is very important to avoid what Thomas is saying, where you have AI everywhere for AI's sake. So I use this chart on the left personally day to day too when I'm thinking about how I want to use generative AI. I'm not pulling it up and being like, I want to write this report, like where is it? I just keep it back of mind, thinking about it, where I think is this the right application. So we have this knowledge of human tasks being high or low, and we have this effort to complete the task being high or low. If your knowledge of the task is low and your effort to complete the task is going to be low, this is where I would veer away from using generative AI. Maybe you can use it to do a bit of research, right? Not starting from a blank page, tap in, see where you can ask the right questions. But because your knowledge is low, it's just almost a waste of time using it, right? Because it's going to take you the same amount of time to do it without generative AI. And maybe you can, but you're not getting value from that. Where you're going to start getting value is in these other quadrants. And that's when either your effort to complete the task is going to be really high, or your knowledge to complete the task is going to be high, and therefore you can validate the outputs easier there. At no point are humans not in this flow. I want to point out you're always there, you're always tapping in, you're always seeing, is this answer right? Is it not? But it's just that mentality of how to approach it. So for example, if you're completing a funding application or a grant application, and your knowledge of the task is going to be high because you know what you're asking for, you know your business, you know what the stakes are, but the effort to complete it is high. And this is going to be a huge time sink, and you just don't really want to write it, and it's just not your thing. That's probably where AI is going to have a lot of value, because you're going to be able to give it the context, your know-how, your business knowledge, and you're going to be able to then expedite the task of completing that and be able to go through and check it and make sure it's right, and then send it on its way in under an hour versus the 5 that it probably took you. Likewise, if I think of something that I don't have a high knowledge of, so in the recent months, I've had to take up a bit of coding, right? That's been kind of my learning curve recently. My human knowledge is really low on that. That's not my background. And so my effort to complete this task is going to be really high. It's going to take me a really long time to write this API call, even to some, though it might seem so simple. So what I'm doing now is I'm using it to learn, right? I'm using it to teach me. So I can go in and say, okay, I need to write this Python script that's going to do A, B, C, D. I don't know how to approach this. I don't know what I'm thinking. Can you please give me some ideas on how to approach it and write the script for me, and also show me what each function in that script is doing? I then can copy and paste it in. I'm learning what each functions are. I'm building my familiarity with some of the different code and word and the script functions. And then I'm using it to build my own repertoire, and I'm getting that task done a lot faster than if I was starting from scratch. Likewise, is it adding value? So in that use case there, it's adding efficiency to the way I'm working. Is it helping enhance your customer experience? I have an example of a friend who works in sales, and suddenly their company is sending out automated emails written by GenAI based on past conversations. And he's so annoyed because he's like, this isn't what my customers want. This isn't how I interact with them. Why are all these emails going out? Now they're annoyed, right? So you need to know your business to know, is this the right approach? Is this how we interact with our clients or customers? Should we be tapping into it this way? Likewise, risk and compliance. So we want to use it to assist with our audits because we don't have the resources there, and not do the audits. I want to make that clear, but help assist to say, okay, where should we be focusing when we look at governance in this way? So always start by asking the right question. Generative AI is not always going to be your solution. Maybe it is standard automation. Maybe, I mean, I don't love them, but maybe you do just need a dashboard. You don't just need generative AI for that sake. So do you have the budget? Do you have the team? What's going to be your right approach to this? Really start thinking about these questions. And I'll pass all these slides over so you can all have them to start to think about too. So I'm conscious this time. I want some time for questions. This, I think, is important where it comes down to choosing that right tool. See these common pitfalls. We've chatted a lot about them. One thing I think is important is this trendy versus necessary. Just because a Copilot integration sounds awesome and we could make it work and it'll be so cool, doesn't mean everyone needs it or that's the right use case for you. Really focusing on what those problems are and what you're trying to solve will guide you in that right direction. And that direction will also point towards whether you're looking at a build, partner, or buy model. And I have these examples here. So if we talk about build, it's like, where are these use cases where it does make sense to start from scratch, like in the case Moss did? But also we leveraged a partnership there. So you can have a bit of a combination, right? Like we leveraged our Azure agreement there to enhance the build, to use those models. When is it right to partner, or where is it right to flick that on switch and say, right, Oracle, we actually do want your AI capabilities. NetSuite, let's turn this on. Salesforce has an awesome AI capability within there. Looking at the tools that you use, Canva for marketing. Do we want to pay for a Canva subscription so that we can use it to generate our marketing content? Jasper AI, I know, is another great one out there too. So where do we want to leverage these tools that already exist? Maybe just one team needs it, and we're going to flick that on switch and we're going to buy that, and that's going to be our solution to solve our problem there. So really thinking about your approach. So for the next 5 minutes, I'll open that chat. I'll try and answer any questions. This slide I just put together this morning. This isn't saying like these are the all and be all content, but these are my favorites when it comes to staying up to date with AI. Every morning I get the Superhuman newsletter. They have some really cool prompts in there. They also spotlight some really neat startups every morning to investigate and see. I also really love the Hard Fork podcast. There's 2 journalists there with backgrounds in tech, and they really go into the details of some partnerships, some ethics agreements going on. And then I also love to stay up to date primarily with NVIDIA and OpenAI webcasts that are going on since they're so hot in the market and wanting to understand what they're saying. So take it or leave it. I think the important thing is to get out there and experiment with generative AI, see what you like, what you don't like, where can you use it? Where is it speeding up some of the tasks that you didn't think could be sped up using it, right? It's so important to go out there and test it for yourself and doing so responsibly. Peter, I see your, oh,
Well,
sorry, I see your hand up.
first going to note, so I like the prompting tip one. Say you have on Superhuman. So prompting, asking questions. You can also give it negative prompts. So one of probably the best prompting tip I ever learned was give it negative prompts of what you don't want it to do. So that way it doesn't get lost on it. Yeah, Peter, your hand's up. Quick question.
Yeah, is this the Q&A portion of
Sure.
the
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
Great.
go for it.
Two-part question, but they're unrelated parts. One thing is a clarification. Jessica, did you say that on that policy example at the end that it created some imaginary policies that that a human had to correct? Did I hear you say that correctly?
Not imaginary, no. So they needed new policies based. So when they ran the first run, that was recommendations. So in the recommendations, it was saying, for example, you're not meeting X OSHA requirement. You need to
Mhm.
rewrite that policy. So then the human reviewed it, made sure it wasn't meeting that OSHA agreement, and then went through and used generative AI to rewrite that policy to ensure it
Okay.
was meeting everything. But then you still need that human to read it, to be like,
Right.
okay, this makes sense and this is in our language.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for clarifying. I thought that was an example of it hallucinating. My main question is my second and main question is really related to small business using generative AI. And it's kind of a blend, but not exactly of the examples you use. So I'll use an example recently where I started an LLC and hired a registered agent to help with some of the LLC representation. And the registered agent company has a bunch of terms of service on their website and guidance on, situations that may happen. I guess where I'm going with all this is there may be a situation in the future where I need to dig into the terms of service, which are many pages, either web pages or many pages of a PDF of this vendor that I'm using. And it'd be ideal if I didn't just rely on, Control F to find the situation of the terms of service. Rather, I was able to train some kind of AI, not necessarily in-house, but I tell, used Anthropic, I tell Anthropic, go to this registered agent website, learn on all the terms of service. And then when you're done, I want to ask you a couple of questions about some scenarios. Like, what if, I change my physical location? What should I do with the registered agent and point out references? Do you know if there's examples where small business owners can harness AI in a very controlled fashion in terms of learning specific things and asking it specific things of that learning?
Yeah, so what you explained right there in my mind, how I would go about this is I'm assuming so the terms and conditions are on a website, so it's public information out
Correct.
there,
Yep.
right?
hmm
You wouldn't necessarily have the model learn, right? That's where we come back to that context window. How I would approach that situation would be leveraging your preferred model. I would probably go to OpenAI because of a context window there. So there's lots of pages. I would try and download it as a PDF. I assume they have a PDF or scrape it so that you have the text. And then I would upload it and say, this is a document I need you to read. I need you to become an expert on its content. Do not give me false information that is not there. And in saying that, that's like with the negative prompting. I recently read a prompt the other day that has been all over Medium because someone's tried to craft a prompt to stop it from hallucinating. So there are some tricks to doing that, like don't give me anything that isn't grounded in the document I've provided you. reference anything. So for every output, tell me what page you got it from, those type of things. And then say, use this as the background as I'm going to start asking you questions. And then start interacting with the document from then on out. Call it out if you see that it's hallucinating or anything. But that's when I would leverage those platforms that are either free or you can get your own personal subscription for. I pay $20 a month for it because I believe that that adds value for me. And then do it that way, right? You don't need to build a software to learn from or anything. That is a use case where you could just use a free tool. And I'm going to follow this on with a question I just see in the chat about learning by doing. Are there any other tasks to kickstart this learning? And that's like going into prompting, right? When you prompt, you always want to give it a role. What is it doing? Is it an assistant? Is it an expert in a topic? You want to activate that context. You want to give it a purpose. You want to say, this is what your sole purpose is, to analyze this policy. You're going to be an expert on these terms and conditions for a startup. And then you're going to start giving it some rules in that, what you do and don't want it to say, right? Trying to debunk these hallucinations. And then you can start those questions. They're kind of my 4 things that I try to ensure in a different prompt. Something that's been annoying with Claude is that Claude is really receptive to how you prompt. It's very specific. So I find a lot of the times if I don't explicitly say it in my prompt, it's not going to do it. And that's been driving me crazy because it's taken me a while to realize that. Because I'll be like, well, you left out ABC, put that in there, and then sure enough, it'll do it. But you need to be specific with how you're prompting. Sometimes garbage in, garbage out, right? The more specific you are in how you prompt, the better your output's going to be. And that's really important to keep in mind as you use it. So I hope that answers some questions.
And I think to kind of expand on that also as well is I've found that the really important thing is to give it, the purpose, the perspective, the why. But you can also ask it, what are the risks that a startup might have to assume here or in a contract on it? Because there's going to be a certain point where you want to involve outside support to review it if you're a small company. You wouldn't want to rely on it for all your legal contracts and then find out that somewhere way back it hallucinated something. Because they definitely do not take the risk that you take in it. So you can ask it about, the risks on it too when you're having it go through a contract, as long as you tell it, this is the person that you want it to give you the risk or evaluation for, and this is kind of why. Because at some point you do need to engage professionals. Like it's amazing that Moss Adams Baker Tilly has this AI platform that you can use, but at some point I guarantee you, they have a CPA or an expert look over it to make sure that it's giving you the right thing. And ChatGPT doesn't give you that personalization. So keep that in mind if you're using it for business work.
Awesome. Well, my email is on the screen. Conscious we are over time right now. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to have a conversation with myself and with the team. Otherwise, thank you all for letting me talk for the past hour. It's been awesome being here. Some great questions have come through too, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you.
A round of applause to Jessica. Thank you very much. And I'm going to go back to wrapping this up here.
Awesome.
All right. So thank you very much, Jessica, for the insight, the practical tips, learning about prompting. I think this session is really valuable. You will find it on our YouTube channel, so you can always go back to it there. We'll share out the slides and Jessica's contact information if you want to follow up and learn more. I want to thank everyone who joined us. We hope that you leave today with a few new ideas, a better understanding of how to approach AI for your business, and the confidence to experiment wisely and responsibly. And again, I want to thank our supporters that we have here, which is SMUD, the Wet Center at Fresno State, Witten Law. So if you're getting to that point with doing legal stuff with AI, make sure you go and talk to Doug Bosley here of Witten Law, River City Bank, Baker Tilly. Their support helps us continue the momentum in this clean tech community. And before you go, I want to invite you guys to our next Clean Tech Meetup, which is in person this Thursday at 5:30 p.m. at Bloom Co-working. We'll be spotlighting regional innovators in battery technology and explore the next wave of energy storage solutions that are being built right here. You can come connect with Core Power, ran by Greg Conley, and LICAP, which is manufacturing and selling batteries right here in Sacramento. So thank you for that, and everyone, have a good day. Bye.